beginning approving minutes. We've gotten behind on a series of minutes approval, and there are a lot of reasons for that. I take responsibility for it, but it is a little bit cumbersome the way we're holding meetings now, so we've gotten behind. So we're going to go through an exercise to approve our meetings and get current. I think it's very important for the transparency of the committee, which we're completely committed to, that we get all our minutes approved in law. So there is good record of everything that we're doing. So we'll do that first. That should take about 10 minutes. The second thing that we are doing is the heart of the meeting. We're going to be going over the feasibility estimates and the concept designs for the project where we are. Okay, and a lot of you have gotten the materials, and that was a bulk of materials, and I'm sure that some of you have gotten through a lot of it, some of you have gotten through a little of it, and it's a little daunting, but we will be going to a presentation of the summaries of all that for both of those areas, and I suspect that's going to take about an hour. So there'll be a lot of information there, and we'll have the opportunity to ask questions and clarifying questions. So we will do that. At the end of that, as you're aware, we have a little work to do, so we're probably going to spend a little time in discussion relating to value engineering options, which we've come a long way, and we've probably come farther than since the last time I checked into it. I want to make mention of the fact how much concerted effort that both SMMA and Hill are putting into this. We were a little surprised by the numbers. We were also a little surprised by the numbers. And over the last week, their teams have put an extraordinary amount of focus in understanding the estimates and culling through them and working to help us get to a point where we're more comfortable with the cost. So I want to make sure everybody understands how much dedicated work has been done over the last week on that. So, so those are the things that we're going to attempt to do today. And my goal is we're up to date on minutes. Everybody here has a reasonable understanding of what was in the estimates and where we are, okay? And number two, we move our way a little, much farther along the process in starting to understand what we're going to do. One, about the little overage we have in cost, and number two, how we're going to approach the enhancements, okay? So with that, I'm going to start the minutes. We have one set of minutes for the full committee meeting. That is the meeting on 3/26, okay? And we have to do this because of the technology. We have to do a roll call vote. So I'm going to go quickly through the committee and well, first I'll ask, does anybody have any changes that they've seen from their copy of the 3/26 minutes? Okay, hearing none, I'll go through the roll call. Stephen Crane?
Excuse me, Tim?
Yes.
Do we need a motion and a second just to?
Yeah, well, is there, pardon me, sorry. Is there a motion to approve the minutes of 3/26/20?
So moved. This is Court Booth.
Is there a second?
Second, this is Heather.
Okay, thank you. Stephen Crane?
Yes.
Jared Stanton?
Yes.
Susan Bates?
Yes.
Lori Hunter?
Yes.
Justin Cameron?
Yes.
John Harris?
Yes.
Russ Hughes?
Yes.
Pat Nelson? Kate Hanley?
Yes.
Court Booth?
Yes.
Heather Bout?
Yes.
Frank Cannon? Chris Popoff?
Yes.
Charlie Parker?
Yes.
Matt Root?
Yes.
And I say yes. Don Corello?
Yes.
I feel like I'm in school taking attendance here. Thank you all for that. We are now up to date on all of the full committee meetings in terms of meetings approval. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Court, who is going to update the minutes for the design subcommittee.
Thank you. So in a moment, I'm going to ask for a motion from a member of the subcommittee to approve the minutes of the meetings of February 13th, 2020, March 25th, 2020, April 15th, 2020, with one notation, and that is that there was a correction which should be on your most current copy of the March 25 draft of the minutes, to the effect that the error I made, noting that there had been no change in the alternate gym size from one iteration to another, was in fact correct. There was a reduction by 400 square feet. Mark caught that for us. Thank you. So your current copy should note that the alternate gym is not noted as unchanged. That's the only change in what you saw from the get-go, and your current copy should reflect that. Any discussion on the minutes, or corrections, I should say, before we ask for a motion? Might there be a motion to that effect for acceptance of the three?
So moved, Dawn.
Dawn, thank you. In a second?
Second?
Thank you. Roll call, Dawn
Yes.
and Lori Hunter, please.
Yes.
And Charlie Parker
Yes.
and Chris Popov,
Yes.
Matt Root.
Yes, Court. I wasn't at the 213, but I approved the 325 and the 415.
Thank you very much. We'll consider it an abstain on, or a no vote on the other one. And Court Booth, yes. So those minutes are approved. Thank you, Tim.
Thank you, Court. And now, one more set, bear with us. I would like either Heather or Pat to approve the minutes of the Communications Committee.
Yes, I can do that. This is Heather. Let me just make sure, is Pat on yet? Because I think we need both of us to vote.
I'm here.
Okay, great. Okay, then we have minutes in front of us from December 16th, 2019, January 22nd of 2020, and February 27th of 2020. Do we have a motion to approve them?
So moved.
I'll second it myself. And roll call vote. I'll start. Heather Bout, aye, or yes.
Pat Nelson, yes.
Okay, we're done.
All right. Great. Thank you very much, Heather.
Thank you.
And just as a note, there are some sustainability subcommittee meetings that need to be approved. There is a sustainability subcommittee meeting tomorrow. I believe it's 1:30. Is that correct, Matt?
9:30 a.m.
9:30. Excuse me. I got too many meetings. I'm trying to keep track of.
Well, it bounced around.
It'll be 9:30 tomorrow, and at that meeting, they will approve the minutes that are outstanding related to the sustainability subcommittee. At that point, we should be current with all of our minutes, and I very much appreciate everybody's indulgence to go through that. And we were all committed now to get that done at the next meeting that any subcommittee or full committee meeting has, so we don't extend this. Okay, appreciate it. With that, as I said, we're going to get an update on the feasibility estimate and the concept design. And I'm going to turn this over to, I believe, either Mike or Kristen, and I'm sure you guys are coordinated in how a presentation is going to begin.
Yes, thank you. The first thing, I was going to try and share my screen here, Mark, but it's not letting me because it's saying that there's another participant sharing. Are you able to transfer that over to me?
Yeah, I just stopped. You should be able to take control now.
Okay. So, can anybody see my screen?
Yep.
Yes.
All right. Are you seeing the screen with the agenda on it, or the screen with the?
Oh,
The agenda, Mike.
Is that?
Just the
I'm
agenda.
sorry.
I see the agenda.
You say, all right. So you pulled the wrong screen over, but that's fine.
Okay.
All right. So, sorry, I've got a lot of different screens open here, so I can pull things back and forth. All right, so I've got the screen now. You should be able to see the summary page from the reconciliation of the 4 options, the 4 concepts. What we've done here is, as Tim mentioned at the beginning, we've met with the estimators. We've gone through and done a reconciliation, which means we've compared one estimator's values on a specific item to another. And we've gone through the whole project to understand how the estimators came up with their numbers and what the numbers that they've come up with are, to make sure that what they've priced is what was expected by the design team. So once we've done that, we've gone through and validated it. The two estimates are, at this point, I would say reasonably close and kind of validating that the numbers are correct. You know, that the numbers are balancing, if you will, based off of the assumptions that we've got. And where we stand right now is we have the 4 concepts across the top here, 1, 2, 3, and 4. And our project costs, assuming that we go chapter 149, which is lump sum, low bid bidding on the project, range from 115.5 million on the high side, that's with concept 1, to the low side on concept 2, which is 109.4 million. And then we have 109.5 and 110.3. There's a few items that get built into that. I'm going to scroll back up to the top here. We start off with the designer construction value. So we have the overall construction cost, the design contingency and escalation, and then the general conditions, general requirement, insurance fee, and bond. So what you're seeing here, the design contingency, well, the new construction is just straight up that. It's what we expect the building to cost. Design contingency is basically an item that will allow us to account for items that are not currently shown in the design. So our design right now is really made up of a minimal number of drawings at this level because we're at a feasibility level. And as we expand on the details into SD and then into design development and then into getting the actual construction documents done, those details will have cost to them. And what we do here is we added design contingency now so that we can put a value in there to anticipate those costs as they come forward. And then the escalation number is a similar number. It's a contingency. We price it when the estimators price it. They price it assuming dollars of today's dollars, and that escalation is to try and get us to when we would be bidding this job in a couple of years. The GCs, GRs, insurance fee, and bond, those are typically the values that you're paying directly to the construction manager or the general contractor in this scenario. We have administration fees, which are the major portion of that would be the OPM's fee, that would be the Hill fee. We have architectural and engineering fees. And what we've done here on all of these are the soft costs. The first section there was the hard costs. The administration, the architectural engineering, and miscellaneous project costs, and then FF&E are all what we would call soft costs. So it's not direct cost of the work, but we put in those based off of our experiences. The one comment I will say on that is on the FF&E allowance, if we were doing a typical MSBA project, they're allowed $1,200 per student for FF&E and $1,200 per student for technology. We're carrying currently $2,000 per student on each of those because we know that it's typically a struggle to keep within that $1,200 per square foot. $1,200 per student range. So we have increased that. And then finally, right now we've got a 5.5% contingency on the construction costs and on the soft costs. So what that is that's 5.5. That's for change orders, for unforeseen that may come up, or even for owner enhancements. As we're reviewing something, maybe we realize that there's something that we forgot and that we need to add. And that's where the $5.5 million would come in. The 5.5% would come in. Again, that's reasonably healthy. And I think one of our value engineering ideas when we get to it is to maybe reduce that from 5.5 down to 5 million. 5.5% down to 5% even. And that would save us some money. In general, the soft costs that we have up here calculate to these percentages. It's 24.7% on the high end, 25.05 on the low end. And that's pretty consistent with what we had talked about 6 weeks ago, about that 25% value. We're obviously higher than on the overall project than we were 6 weeks ago. And we've had some discussions with the designers and with the estimators to see what's in here that wasn't expected 6 weeks ago. And many of those items have fed into the value engineering items that we put on the value engineering log. So are there any questions at this point?
I'll just make one comment that I think I referenced this in some of the stuff that I sent out to people. It's not unusual that any project comes to a point in the estimating process where you're over what you had anticipated. That is not unusual in my experience and having been involved in several of these. Don can comment on that also, but we do have, as you can recognize this, we were hoping for the range of within $100 million, and you can see we're at this point, okay, and this is a point where these are the numbers that came back from the estimators reconciled. We're about somewhere between 10 and 13% over that. So I think that it is incumbent on us to now look at that very carefully and to see what we can do about that and getting it back into the range that we had hoped for. Without, by the way, one significant caveat, without having a negative input on the educational program. We put a lot of time into the educational program for Concord that exists and that which we are envisioning for the new facility in terms of enhanced teaming, and we want to preserve that. We want to look at these, we want to look at what we are doing with the very first idea that we're going to preserve the educational program that we have as we have defined it. So our task is not unusual for a building committee. We have to look at original estimates that are over where we want it to be and maximize the educational input as we evaluate the value engineering. So my comment is, yes, we have work to do, but it is not unusual that building committees have work to do, and better to do it now than the experience we had with the high school where we did it after we had the builder and the MSBA said, stop, we have to take a look at this. This is a normal part of the process. Those are my comments.
I would agree, Tim, just so everyone knows that I'm in full agreement as far as, you know, this is where some of the tough decisions get made, and, you know, we have to all sort of be on the same page as far as, you know, supporting the educational plan, but also then, you know, deciding how to best spend the money that we've, you know, agreed within our budget that we want to spend. So there'll be some tough decisions, but that's not unusual.
The other thing I would also say, I forgot to add this, that if you scroll back up, Mike, to the dollars per square foot area, you can see that the building size is consistent across the 144,000 square feet is consistent across all the options, and that has not varied from what we had thought, what we had given to the estimator. So the size is sort of consistent. What we're looking at a lot is this line that says cost per square foot of the design construction. And well, when we had started this, we had gotten some information, and Mike can talk to this, from the estimators that we were using a number. We were optimistic about being within the $100 million. We were using a number in the $550, I believe, around that area. And you can see here,
that's correct.
That we can see here that these vary from just over $600 to $650. So that's really an area that is a significant part of the variance here. There are some other areas embedded in the numbers, but that's sort of the difference between say 500 to 550 and 600 to 650 is really sort of in some ways what we're working on.
And in full disclosure, this is Dawn, and we met as a leadership group prior to this meeting and talked through with Sims and Hill as far as, what these costs include and where we are with things. And this is not news to Sims or Hill or to the leadership team, but I'm surprised that the numbers are these high. This is what I do for a living, and I shared with these guys, I had just reconciled a similar sized building last week at the end of design development. And for me, being in the 500s seems reasonable. That project that I worked on, which is not in any way under designed, is just over $500 a square foot. And so to be, in a range of 608 to 643 for me is concerning. And I've gone through some of the numbers in detail and shared with the team last week where I felt like reductions could be made. So I'm willing to do that again, like sort of with the new updated numbers and going through each option with a fine-tooth comb. But there were definitely places that in my opinion, either assumptions were made on the high side or the estimators assumed certain things. Because at this point, they're doing a lot of per square foot costs because, as Tim mentioned, at feasibility, it's normal that, the plans are pretty, they're light, as in, they don't show all the doors and windows. So you give and I think I got the document that Sim shared, the amounts of things so that the estimators had a sense of square footage for certain items.
Okay, with that, there was one other item I wanted to talk about specifically with the estimating, and it's just, I mentioned design contingency and escalation, and I'm just gonna go to the bottom of one of the estimates. Specifically, just so everyone understands, we're currently carrying 13% for design contingency and 6% for escalation. One of the VE items might be talking about adjusting that 13 down to 12, which is typically what we would typically see on our projects. I think Dawn mentioned to me before that that's typically what she would see at this level as well. That 1% is almost $1 million.
That was the first thing I marked up when I got this. I was like, wait, we're still at 13. I'm used to seeing 12, but just so everyone knows the order of magnitude, that's almost $700,000. But
and actually, when you add the soft cost to it, it's almost $1 million. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. The escalation. The only reason why I want to point out the escalation, what we're doing right now, 6% is roughly 2% a year. 3% a year, which is what you would typically see. And the only reason why I want to point this out is we've talked to both estimators, and we're not taking any consideration for COVID-19 right now on these estimates. And I think part of it is because it's really an unknown right now. Part of it is because we're bidding far enough off. We're talking about bidding a year and a half to 2 years from now. That hopefully the COVID-19 has passed at that point. The one thing the estimators have shared with us is that the closest analogy that they would have to this is the financial, the downturn in the stock market back in 2008. And from a construction cost standpoint, what happened with that is we didn't get escalation for the next 2 years. Pretty much construction costs stayed flat, and initially they actually dipped a little bit. So that's not something we should be considering adjusting right now, but it's just something to have in the back pocket, something to understand that with what's going on right now, that escalation is maybe a little bit up in the air.
One question, Mike.
Yes.
Just so this can be in people's minds as you move forward. If you look at this bottom line on the slide that's up right now, the estimated construction cost of 92, it looks like 92 to $90 million. Is that fair?
That is correct.
That's
yeah.
good. To get to just hypothetically to get to $100 million project cost, what would be the range that number has to be in?
So basically, whatever the construction cost is, we're adding about 25% to that. Let me just go back to the summary page here. So our construction values range from 87 to 92, and that gets us in roughly about 9 to 15 million over. So we're looking to be down in the 77, 78 range, be in that $100 million range. If I typed in 78 million,
So it's roughly $10 million.
roughly $10 million in construction value, correct?
And I'm not.
It looks like
yeah,
that
no,
78 would be a little high, but yeah.
Yeah, the method of doing this is from the bottom up. You have to look at specific things, but I just want everybody to get an idea, have a good idea of the magnitude of what we're looking at here in terms of getting to 100. Now, will we get to 100?
It's 8 to
We don't
10
know.
million.
Yeah. And will we get there? We don't know, but that's the exercise we're at right now.
And just so everybody knows, the value engineering log, there's a lot of items on that log that there might be 2 or 3 levels on, so you can't accept all 3, but we've got millions. I think the total of, the running total right now of all the options is 18 million. You probably couldn't take more than half of that, but we think we've got a lot of items on there, and we're continuing to explore those and continuing to expand those. So that's just a little, a quick preview on that. But before we get into the value engineering discussions, I think we want to know if anybody had any specific questions on any one of the concepts, and if there are, we can answer those. If not, we can maybe look at the pricing options. And we want to make clear, that everybody, we are calling these pricing options. The reason why these items were separated out is so that we could understand the cost of those items, not necessarily because we wanted to keep them out of the base, but so that we can understand the cost and see what see what the ramifications of those costs are. The other thing we've done in Kristen and the design team, when we get to that point, we'll probably chime in on the pricing options as it relates to the sustainability items, because we have done a first pass at what is the return on investment. So if we were to invest X dollars in better windows, better insulation, things of that nature, when would the payoff be? Would it be 3 years? Would it be 5 years? Would it be 12 years?
Okay, let's go.
That's
Why don't we?
an important part.
Let's go one step at a time. We started that off with questions, and I think it's a good time to make sure that everybody, up to this point, what we've presented so far, the estimates, the reconciliation, the nature of where we are, and the issue we face. I want to allow anybody to add. This is a point. Standing that. So, are there any clarifying questions that people have relating to the?
So Tim?
Yes.
So I'll just offer up, this is Court, just more of a comment than a question, just to sort of reaffirm what we're looking at. You referred to options. This has the 6,000 foot gym and the cafetorium. Am I correct?
That is correct. This base option has those.
Yeah. Just stating it for the record, what we're looking at. Thank you.
Any others?
Okay, Mike, I have one question. When you say you're looking at paybacks and so forth on these sustainability features, which sustainability features? I would assume these would be the features that are already baked into the document that's in front of us right now. These wouldn't be the adds or adjustments that are under consideration.
It's a little bit of both, Charlie, and when we get to that slide, I think that will help us. We can talk more specifics if we can just wait a little bit on that. The one thing that I would like to elaborate on is I just want to be clear again here for the record that we have not made all sustainability pricing options. We have a pretty sustainable building right here with the base. This base building includes the brand new energy code with the stretch code and LEED silver. So we already have a lot of reasonable, proper sustainability items in this base, but we have taken the extra step to increase insulation, to go to all electric, to go to triple pane windows, do things of that nature. And again, we put those as options partly so that we can understand the cost impact of each of those items, but partly so that we can actually report back on that return on investment, that by spending X dollars on windows, you're getting a return on investment on that. So that's why we had those as separate items.
Yeah, let me amplify on that for just a moment, because Mike has touched on it. The reason we defined a base building as it was anticipation of the discussion that we're going to have about the significant other things that we really want to put into the project, okay? We've been talking since day one about a very aggressive level of sustainability. We've been having discussions relating to the gym and the need for athletic facilities in the town. We've had discussions from day one about the auditorium and what not only town services, but what it needs to do in order to support the aggressive music and arts needs of not only the school, but the other programs that can use that. The goal was not, when we split these things up, was not to say this is one that we're going to do and these are things that we may not do. The goal was to get as clear an understanding of the costs of the building and those enhancements so we can have a good discussion of those. Okay, so we've gotten, and I will have some discussion of correspondence in the latter part of the meeting, but we've gotten recently a significant amount of letters specifically about the arts area and the size of the auditorium. And we really appreciate that for anybody who is watching this or is concerned about those areas. We want to have the greatest support that we can for those also. We also have gotten significant input from the sustainability community related to our commitment to enhanced sustainability. I would amplify what Mike said is the way this is presented is not a specific direction yet as to what we are going to do. It's a way to get good information. The level of sustainability that's embedded in what we call the base building is what the MSBA recommends now. So when we have these discussions, we're going to have to answer the questions: how much is sustainability is going to aggressive sustainability going to cost us? How much is an enhanced gym going to cost us? And the way we have laid it out allows us to answer intelligently those questions and have a good dialogue for us to collectively, with input from the community, make good decisions on those things. So that's why we're seeing it in the way that it is. And I know some people think because, oh, you made that an enhancement, which means it's not going to happen. Those decisions have not been made because we haven't had that dialogue. That's kind of where we are. The goal is to get a really good handle on that base building and the enhancement, so we can have a really good dialogue about that.
I think that's all good, and I think the approach is appropriate. I think everything you said, I agree with it all. No problem there. I just think that as we do the analytics on these items, that we should consider them to the extent possible as line items rather than trying to package them together and looking at items, in a group, because we may not want to package them the way that they're being packaged.
Right. Good
So
point.
let's separate these out so we can look line item by line item.
And Charlie, I just flipped open the page so we can start looking at that. That's exactly how we have done it. So
Okay, great. That's perfect.
It's a laundry list that you can pick and choose.
Beautiful.
Again, this is Dawn. And I don't want to seem like I'm coming down hard on Sims, because I'm not, because I appreciate all the hard work that they're doing in conjunction with Hill. And this, again, isn't news to them, because I put it both in an email and when we spoke last week or earlier this week, time's a blur these days, about the costs. But some of these enhanced options that we're calling them in this project, I bake into buildings as a baseline on my project. So when I said that I reconciled the building last week in the low 500s, that building has triple glazing. That building has 10 inches average insulation on the roof. That building has 3 inches foundation and underslab insulation. So, you know, in my mind, to be in the mid sixes, you know, between 600 and 650 cost per square foot without some of these, again, for me, I've expressed my concern that the cost is high, and then to have that on top of it, where in a lot of cases, I'm able to embed that in our base building because it's good practice. It's, you know, in the climate that we live in, those are features, in my opinion, that should be embedded in projects these days. It's good practice. So I've pushed on Sims to, you know, just as a, you know, as a fellow professional in the field, those are things that we're trying to do in just as good practice. So when I originally saw them as enhanced and then, you know, cost on top of a mid sixes cost per square foot, I question why that's not in the 600 to 643 cost per square foot already.
Tim, Dawn, if I might ask a question. Dawn, let me be very direct. Is the implication here that this could, by baking some of this in, as you say, this could result in maybe some economies with the pricing?
I don't know. It's hard to say. I don't know what kind of, you know, energy model's been run, what assumptions have been shared as far as an energy model, but those are triple glazing, 6 inches exterior insulation, mineral wall, 10 inches average on the roof, and, you know, 3-inch underslab and foundation wall are like where I start. So I'm not saying, I don't know, I'm not on the design team and I'm not questioning their capabilities to do all these things. I'm just saying that I have that in my $503 a square foot building. That is only 4,000 square feet bigger than this building. So, you know,
this is Martine. I'm happy to comment on that if allowed.
yeah, by all means. I mean, and again, I don't want this to feel like I'm,
you know,
questioning what you guys are doing, because I believe in you guys. You guys are great designers, and you know, this is very much a collaborative effort. It's just I'm using the same estimators and the same, you know, some of these enhanced products already, and I'm getting different costs per square foot. So
Dawn, I'm with you. We did a lot of work with the estimators. At this time, they are the numbers they're providing us, but I will tell you that these numbers, I would agree with you. Some of these numbers, I believe, because we're at feasibility, are at a certain level of contingency and have a higher cost baked in. Some of our recent net zero estimates do have lower cost per additional inches than what is in this. Avery, you need to. I'm sorry. No, wonderful. Thank you. Sorry, this is my son.
I get it too. I totally get it. I've got 2 upstairs that like to interrupt me.
It's part of where we are. It's part of where we are right now.
Right. So basically, there is some higher cost right now, and I think, you know, in terms of what Tim said, I think as we go through this conversation, maybe there's a way to come to an understanding of what are the right costs right now, so everything's clear. The building in the base building, the building has 6 inches of insulation, because that's what we need to
that
get.
Was the one thing that was in line with what I typically, because you had an enhancement to go to 8, which in my experience, and again, you guys are running the energy models, I've never found the payback to go to 8 to be worthwhile. But every building's different.
Right. I'm going to cover this a little later, and I'll show how actually the payback is actually looking pretty good, but in my mind. And so we've priced 8, and then what's in the project right now on the roof is 8 inches And then in the enhance, we've priced 10 inches. But I do agree with you. I think on the triple glazing, there is some contingency in the prices right now. We've got bids from other projects that are very encouraging. And so as I want to make sure that as part of the conversation, to your point, Dawn, that as we go through these, we look at alternative possibilities to work the numbers and possibly look at ad alternates, because by the time we bid this, the whole cost market could be very different. And for example, to pick on the triple glazing, within the next 2 years, there's going to be such a demand for it. I think that it's going to be at cost, possibly.
Agreed. Maybe not with the U values that you see on Passive House quite yet, at least in my experience. That's
No, I would agree. I would totally agree. But at least, you know, to the sort of the levels we're looking at outside of Passive House at 0.22. So I just wanted to bring that up. I don't want to take too much time. I wanted to bring that up, and we can certainly go in all of those details as we go through the payback analysis.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. The one thing I would say is, in my mind, it doesn't make sense to go to 8 inches of exterior insulation if you're only at a double glazed window and you have 30% windows. So you're basically, you're super insulating the wall and then you're letting it all in and out through the window. So for me, it's a holistic.
Totally agree.
Okay.
Yeah, totally agree. Yeah.
Okay, I think we should, in the interest of time, keep moving now, Mike. Maybe what's next, to go through the options, or?
Yeah, so what we want to do is kind of go through the options. I would start by saying, did anybody have any specific questions? I didn't want to spend a lot of time on these, but I wanted to make sure that everybody understood them, that we had a couple of site options first off. And I assume everybody can still see my screen, that I have the options up on the screen right now.
Yes.
And then we have what we call the building options, and in that building option, we had really two main ones, which is the gym size potentially increasing, and then the performance size potentially increasing. And so the base gym, I think Court was the one that mentioned, is a 6,000 square foot gym. Option one would be to increase that to 8,600 square feet. That would accommodate not only a full-size basketball court but also a large number of seating, up to 320 people in seats. And then we went to a second alternate, which is 13,400, which would allow us to have actually two full-size courts side by side with some seating for those two courts. And then on the performance space, this B1, the black box, would be to increase, or actually not to increase, to change from a cafetorium to just a cafeteria, but also have a black box theater. Just so people know, I think we've talked about this a little bit in the past, but the black box theater is a smaller theater, steeper seating arrangement, so that you can fit more people into it, but it's not a traditional stage, if you will. It's kind of a theater in the round. Is that the right way to talk about it, Kristen?
Sorry, I was muted. So the black box is in lieu of the cafetorium. It's the empty box with pull-out seating. And then the 1 grade level auditorium is a traditional sloped floor. And same with the 2 grade auditorium is a traditional sloped floor. We did not look at shapes like theater in the round or anything specific. We were purely going off of sizing.
Okay. So just the black box is a little bit smaller. It seats 400 people, but it's a smaller physical area. The 1 grade level is actually a smaller theater, but it's more traditional, and it's got the slope flooring, and then you have the grade 2, the 2 grade level, which would be the larger stadium, the larger auditorium seating with the traditional stadium seating, and you have 550 person capacity there. Just so everybody understands, what these ads are strictly, I'll say, building ads or building adjustments. We have not tried to take into consideration anything for additional parking or anything because of these. We're looking at it from an educational point of view, that this would be allow us to have functions in there for the students, not necessarily, I'll say, specifically for town meeting or something like that, although you certainly could use it for that. We haven't added parking or things like that, though.
And Mike, I should add that in the packet that was circulated, there was a memo on performance spaces, because I know that there were a lot of questions around what is the difference between cafetorium and all of these items. So in the packet that Tim sent out, there was a memo that talks about what to assume for a cafetorium type space, black box, and so on.
That's a great point, yes. So one of the things we did do, I wasn't going to spend a lot of time on it, but what we did do is we provided 2 memos, one that Kristen just referred to specific to the performance space, but the other one was just in general, the kind of the assumptions that we asked the estimators to use when doing their estimates. So those are the specifics that the estimators were given, along with some of these high level renderings and sketches of the buildings, so that they could do these estimates. And then that if you have questions on what are we carrying, or what did we assume for this or that is a good resource to look at. All right. Are there any questions on that first section with the site options and the building options? If not, I can move into the sustainability. All right. So on the sustainability, we tried to look at them with like we were saying when Charlie asked the question earlier, we created a shopping list here that we could choose, for example, adjusting the roof insulation from 8 inches to 10 inches, but not choose to adjust the wall insulation. So we have multiple options there that you could pick and choose. We did try to group a few of these options at the bottom into what you would need for a net zero building and what you would need for a passive house building. So we tried to not only give you the shopping list, but also give you a couple of options. Not saying that those options would have to be followed, but one of the estimators, A.M. Fogarty, who is working for the design team, actually priced up each concept because the building size is the same, but the overall skin, the layout, the amount of roof and everything is a little bit different from option to option. So you can see, for example, on option 1A, the roofing for option 4 is larger than the roofing for option 2, say. So that's why you've got a larger number there, basically. But the options that are the enhanced options that we were looking at was increasing the roof insulation, increasing the wall insulation, adjusting from a typical AVB to a better air tightness, a better air infiltration rate, adjusting the underslab insulation, and then we have adjusting from standard double glazed windows to a standard triple glazed window unit. And a standard triple glazed window unit would have a U value of 0.25 or better. Then we have an option here which is adjusting to a similar style or similar U value window, but rather than having 3 panes of glass, you would have 2 panes of glass and a third pane in the middle there. That would be a high performance. Sorry, the 0.25 U value is the double glaze. The triple glaze gets us down to a U value of 0.22 or better. So we're getting better on that.
Hey, Mike?
A6, yes, go ahead.
This is Martine. I think that just to clarify, the A5 is 3 layers of glass. A6 is the layer in the middle is not glass, it's a lighter item, and the lightness makes it less expensive, basically. That's the difference between A5 and A6.
And then A7 would actually take it to an even higher performance triple glazed window, which is something that you might see in the passive house scenario. Or you would be required to use that in the passive house option. A8, so in the options up above, we were looking at fiberglass window unit. A8 would be changing that fiberglass to an aluminum. Sorry, not A8, A7 would be changing that to Sorry, I skipped one. It was A9. Sorry. So A7 is the high performance passive house glass. A8 is adjusting the window to wall ratio. So what that's doing is that's reducing the amount of windows and increasing the amount of brick, and the brick is less expensive than the window. So there's a net savings there. I think that's another one that Don had mentioned earlier, that 25% range is more of what she would typically see in the buildings that she's used to working with. A9 is what I started to talk about with the aluminum clad instead of the fiberglass. And then A10, I think that is actually something that should be a negative because it's actually, it would be an added cost there. It wouldn't be a savings. That's to actually add the green roof. So I think in the concepts that the design team was showing, they were showing a green roof there. And because it was only on that one concept, we didn't want to make the base. We wanted the base to be apples to apples. So we kept it out of the base and we added it as a sustainability option. From the plumbing
You want to take
side,
quick on the sustainability stuff first?
Sure. Yeah, this is all that, but yeah, absolutely, Charlie. If you have some
Okay, I
questions,
just have a couple of quick ones. On the A3, would it make any sense to include actually a metric around CFM as opposed to simply saying, let's increase it? Increasing it seems to be, let's do a better job, whereas a metric is something that we really want to, measure to and achieve. So that would be one question. Let's start with that one.
Martine, yeah.
Yeah, so the purpose of A3 actually, there is an option to get to 0.25 CFM, which is actually an option in the code, Mike. So while we're pricing this, I just want to say that we may end up having to do this for stretch code. I was under the understanding that the additional AVB that was priced there was for passive house. So it may just be a typo here. The increase by 10% is for passive house, right?
That's correct.
Okay.
I
The
believe that is
performance
correct,
and
Yeah.
the code is already in the A3 main line item.
Right, that's what I think. Okay, so
Passive house has a metric, for example, for CFM,
right,
and you don't include it here under
right.
description of A.
Yeah, maybe we just need to clarify on that first A, increasing taping by 10%. So the code is going to require the C406.25. And so to get to passive house, the metric would be 0.08.
Right.
Mike, I think we're, in terms of the use of the entire committee, I think there's a certain level of detail that we need to get to, and then there's a specificity that is probably beyond what we need to do at the full committee level.
Okay.
If we can get to there's a net here, right? To get to net zero, there's a certain amount, and then you somehow relate that to passive house. Can we get to that level?
Sure. So just real quick here, we have a couple of plumbing options. We've graded a couple of these out. One of them we realized is actually in the base base option anyway. And actually there was another one that was on this list that was about gray water, and we realized that it's actually an increase to the cost, and then it's an increase to operational costs and operational issues, and we decided that that was not something that anybody would ever recommend, so we decided to take that off at this point. We do have several mechanical options as well that we looked at, and you can see some of the numbers. We're still working on getting some numbers into there. And then we have enhanced electrical options. And what we've ultimately been able to ascertain is for a net zero building, for example, you would need to take the options up above, A1, A2, A4, A5, M1, and E1. And that's at a minimum. You could always change from A5 windows to A6 or A7 windows if you wanted, but that's at a minimum. That's what you would need to, or that's at a minimum, I think, of what we would recommend to take to allow yourself a chance for a net zero building. and that would basically increase your base values, those other base values on all the options, all the concepts that we had, by about $900,000. If we wanted to go to passive house, again, you can see the list of the options that we're saying that, you know, that you'd have to pick them up above, and that would be an increase of about $4 million to $6 million. Again, there's a bit of a range there in that one, 4.5 to 6, almost 6.8.
When you look at this, those are pretty big differences between the two estimators.
They are, yes, and part of that is just that these are very conceptual, and I think as the design would progress, then you'd see those estimates getting closer together. But part of that is just it's a high concept right now.
But if you take this, and I'm a layman in here, as are most of the people on the committee, but we are fortunate that we have a core of people who know this very well. Okay, but what this is telling me is from the base building that you've laid out, this analysis says somewhere between $400,000 and $893,000 to get to net zero.
So right now, even though we have the two estimates reviewing it and kind of validating each other, we're currently working off of the AM Fogarty estimate, which is SMMA's estimator. That's pretty much the typical what you would do on public processes. Is we have the Hill estimators there to validate and to review. And overall, I think if you look at all the options, all the concepts, they're within a 5 to 8% range. So I think that's it. But what I would say is we should be really looking kind of at the AM Fogarty column here. So we're talking about $470,000 for net zero. We're talking 6.7 for passive.
Okay. So that's what this is telling us. Okay. Now as I said, we have a group of people who know this well better than I do, and to reiterate what it said, to me it says is to get to net zero capability, net zero ready capability. If we go in the Fogarty column, that's somewhere around $500,000, and then a much larger number to get the passive house. Now, I think rather than take a lot of time in this committee, I think we're going to have to, you're going to continue the discussion with our experts such that they believe in these numbers. They may or may not, I don't know, but
yeah. Tim, this is Matt. Could I just jump in real quick? I mean, I guess I worry that I feel like these numbers it's really premature to be sharing some of these numbers. And I worry that people are going to get anchored to these numbers. I mean, I think there's a lot of discussion that still needs to occur. I mean, I certainly appreciate all the work that has gone into this. From my perspective, it seems like the real value in the cost estimating work that's been done to date is higher up and looking at the 4 design options that we're looking at, because there's consistency in how the costing has been done to that. And so we can see that there's a real difference between, the price of option 1 versus option 3. But as Don highlighted, there's a lot of details that need to be worked out. And I guess, obviously some of these numbers are really big numbers and on these options. And I worry that it's premature in these numbers. And, like the sustainability group hasn't been, there's been no communication with our subcommittee about the package that was put together. I mean, I'm assuming one of the big cost drivers in the passive house number is the windows, but we can't, the 0.14 that's used as a U value is that there's no hard cap on that number. It can be a different number based on the energy model out of the passive house. So I think there's a lot more flexibility. And I guess I'd love to have seen some big error bars. I worry that people are going to get stuck on $470,000 for net zero energy and 6.8 million for passive house.
Yeah.
Can I ask a quick question? Will there be a difference in how much it costs to get to net zero or costs to get to passive house depending on which design we decide to go with?
There is adjustments to that. If you notice the numbers that we are talking here, it's a good point, Pat, is we've noted this is concept one. And I think the reason why that was chosen is that's the most expensive option. So we felt that was the one, it should potentially go down from there if we went to one of the lesser options. We'd have to actually evaluate each of those. But we went with the high value right now, the conservative value.
Thank you.
Could I add something to what Matt said, Charlie, very quickly? One of the things that I'm having a little bit of trouble with is the notion that to get to net zero, it's going to cost X. To get to passive house, it's going to cost Y. Because I don't think we've ever had the discussion on what that column ought to consist of. How do we know, and have we agreed on what we think net zero is? Have we agreed on what we think passive house is? I think Matt was alluding to that under the windows. I think that we ought to have some conversation before we start totaling up stuff around what should be in that column and what shouldn't be and why. Now, if Sims has that, I think we'd like to see it.
We do have a more detailed, Mike, I don't know if you wanna bring that up if we have time, but we do have a more detailed set of numbers that we could share between the four options.
No, I'm not talking about between the four options. I'm talking about for all four options, there should be some notion of standard relative to net zero and passive house. I know you've had the columns that you presented in previous meetings, but I don't think we've ever agreed to what should be specifically in those columns and what shouldn't be. And I think we need to have that conversation. I think that's work yet to be done that we haven't done. And I think back to Matt's point, before we get too wedded into what costs more and what costs less, I think we should have that discussion. That's the holistic sort of systems, discussion that we need to have.
If I could add on to that, is that this is an extreme level of specificity for the level of design that we're at and the number of options that we're carrying. So a lot of that systems and those holistic views occur when we do the energy modeling, and the detailed energy modeling would occur in SD when you have one concept. So then that's when all of those adjustments and trade-offs and decisions are made. So I think that's what why the team was looking at more this very spread list of potentials, because at this time the energy model is a very high level kind of box model, and it's not developed to the degree where you can pin down the specifics yet. We agree there's a lot of work to be done, and there are a lot of conversations to be had. And to Matt's point, I think that we do need to narrow it down to a concept and understand what the limitations are and the goals for the committee as a whole in order for us to really drill down to that level.
I just want to add to that, Charlie, that what was priced had some specific metrics that were at this level that were basically representative of the closest set of metrics to get to net zero in terms of the enclosure, in terms of the electrical, and in terms of the mechanical. At this level, I mean, the mechanical system information that we provided, and it had actually a much more level of detail than a typical feasibility study, but still, as Kristen said, there's more detail that would be explored during schematic design. But we did have each of the components of net zero and each of the incremental components as much as we could craft at this level for passive house. But I do agree with you and Matt that there are ways to, and Lois from Steve Winter Associates has brought that up in previous meetings, there are ways to work around passive house and kind of in a comprehensive way look at the building and address some synergies that would reduce some of the higher level stringent criteria. In terms of net zero, I think what we've done here is at this level is very close in terms of metrics. I think maybe that we need to maybe vocalize and present to the sustainability team maybe in more detail what it encompasses. And maybe we could do that tomorrow. I'm happy to do that. I do agree there needs to be more detailed the discussion here.
If I could just step in here and maybe step up a little bit and help me with this. I need some help understanding this. If we're heading to schematic design, which I understand to be a significantly more detailed level of understanding of a specific concept, okay? Not many specific concepts, a much narrower specific concept. If you view that, there's a set of decisions that you have to make to get there, okay? And some of those are around this area of sustainability. If there are going to be questions, and there definitely are, of cost, that the questions will be asked is how much does it cost us to get to net zero, and how much does it cost to get us to this next level of passive house? There's sort of, I'm hearing, and maybe I'm the only one, there's sort of a chicken and egg thing there. We don't know what that is until we do the whole thing. But if we do the whole thing, it's sort of baked into the concept that we're doing. And I get that. But this isn't the first of these projects that have been done. And I am absolutely certain we're not the only community that has the question of how much it costs as part of the decision making. So help me with what, how do we approach this? One notion is basically you define it's exactly what we want to do. We want to go to net zero. We want to go to passive house, and we put that in schematic design, and you find out, right? But at that point, you've done the schematic design, right? So I'm kind of struggling with that. You need enough analysis to say, okay, these are the things that our team believes is in net zero or in the concept they want to go to. So we can get somewhat of an understanding of that right now. So we have the confidence to put that stuff into the schematic design, but it's not the overall design. So can you help me with that a little bit? Sure.
I think it would really be beneficial to look at the payback analysis that we prepared. Because we have the first cost here, and we're looking at the first cost, and then we did.
Yeah, but before we get into all these numbers, okay, I talk about process. I talk about process of what to get to schematic design. And this is for our team too, our sustainability team and you. To get to schematic design, we have to sort of agree on a concept that we want. And how do we do that?
If I can make a quick comment, Martine, and then I'll turn over to you. I think we've got a sustainability meeting tomorrow. So to Charlie's earlier question about, what should we be including in net zero? What shouldn't we be including? I think we've tried to lay it out that we're including, options A1, A2, A4. I think that would be a good discussion to have tomorrow. And then we could come back potentially next week with that understanding that, hey, we all are collectively think that this is what we need for net zero. And this is what we need for passive house. And we can, if Matt thinks, the 0.14 window is not required, maybe we need to go a little better than what we have in option A5, but not all the way to A6. We can have those discussions outside this and bring that back to the big group. And that might help us further this along a little bit easier.
So Mike, I would agree. I think I just want to give a big overview right now to everyone about what we have in here. It may be confusing because we have a lot of items, but what we have in here in the A1 through A4 and the M1 and the E1 is an EUI 25 to 27. We actually have some early modeling that we can talk about tomorrow as well. So that price, that additional price, that incremental cost represents an EUI of 25 to 27. And what I did once we go through the details of what that is, I'm going to give you a very quick overview of that. We have an enhanced enclosure beyond stretch code that has an R40 wall and an R60 roof that has triple glazing at 2 levels of cost, because we wanted to look at the heavy triple glass and then the lighter triple glazing that's more affordable. We have 75% plug load controls of code. It's the incremental cost between 50% that's required by the code and 75% for net zero. We have an additional incremental cost for the emergency generator because, and that's something I would like to discuss tomorrow, because the base cost that we're looking at here is a natural gas heating system. So our analysis also that we're probably going to present tomorrow, our analysis has looked at both a base heating, natural gas heating system EUI compared to the net zero, as well as a base all electric EUI. When you compare to a base all electric, you have to have the additional electric generator in the base. Just want to bring that up. And then we have a VRF air source heat pump, not the small residential one, a commercial level air source heat pump system in the mechanical. And we are also comparing a geothermal based mechanical system for the all electric. So we're looking at the two. The number you're seeing here at 500,000 is showing the option where we combine the enhanced insulated enclosure with the air source heat pump mechanical system, because the air source heat pump mechanical system comes at a credit compared to the natural gas heating system. And so it helps reduce that incremental cost. So there's a lot to it. I can understand how this is maybe overwhelming. There's a lot.
No, excuse me.
It has to be looked at comprehensively.
Yeah, thank you for that. That's a lot of detail. I think what's clear to me is that we need to have the understanding of that along with our sustainability people. So you both say, yes, this is what we want to do, okay? And we may all agree that maybe we should have done that before, but now we have to do that, okay? It's not, you know, we have 4 people who are completely able to have that discussion and want to have that discussion, so that should happen, okay? So because it's useful, the thing that will be useful to our expanded group is for you and our sustainability team is, this is what we think we need to do to get to net zero, and we kind of agree on that, okay? And this is, it doesn't even have to be totally specific, but this is a range of costs that is going to involve. Does that make sense?
Yes, absolutely. I think that that to me, that sounds like a great plan.
All right.
And hey, Tim, this is Matt. I know we want to move on. Just quickly, I mean, I fully appreciate and understand that the full committee is going to want to see a price, and to answer your cost for premium for the sustainable options we're talking about. And I mean, to answer your question about process, I think we just need to get together and come to a consensus on a package of enhancements that we feel comfortable with, that will get us to the goals that the town is discussing, and then get a price on those. But it's also just really early, and one concern is that there's a lot of fear-based pricing in these this current.
I know it's early, you know, it's just we we do have to make some decision about what we want to go into schematic design, though. So what we can do is have our experts agree that these are the things that are included in that, and then the full committee has the ability to say this is what we want to include. So maybe we can get that done. Okay, Mike.
Yeah. All right. So just to kind of wrap that up, I think if I can remind everybody, the ultimate goal here, and whether it happens next week or if we have to consider extending this discussion, is to narrow down from one of the concepts, or narrow down to one of the concepts. The other thing we're going to be considering with not only these pricing options, but the value engineering that we're reviewing, there's going to be some things in both lists that we say, absolutely, we want those, we need them. There's going to be some things in both lists that we say, we really just don't want those. And then there's going to be a lot of gray area items. So the things that we can accept and reject, we'll do that. But just because it's a gray area, we don't have to make all the decisions right now. We have the ability, when we narrow down from 4 concepts to 1 concept, to start looking at that 1 concept in more detail with the design team. And like I said, if there's something that's the gray that we want to continue to evaluate, we can absolutely do that.
Okay, we've got about 40 minutes left in our meeting. Okay, and what's the best use of that time to get to the value engineering, to look at the design concepts? What do you guys suggest?
I would suggest maybe the value engineering, unless Kristen has anything different. I think the other thing I would suggest is that we do have some net zero payback information that will circulate, that people can take a look at, and I think we'll report back with more information on that after the sustainability meeting tomorrow.
So Kristen, this is Keith. I would suggest that the major VE moves are made in response to the design concepts as presented. And I think just a few minutes to review the design concepts might put the VE initiatives in some context. So I might suggest that wouldn't be a bad idea.
I think that's good.
Mike, do you have the design concepts update slides? Okay, great.
Okay, so I'll just walk through this briefly. The thing that I would like to say is I think, Tim, to your question, how do you prepare to move forward into SD? I think initially what you have to do is attack the 8 to 13% overage on cost per square foot basis and see how you can drive these down to get to a place where you're comfortable with the cost model and you think that the option strongly supports the educational model. So and I would say that I think those things is driven by major moves, things like building volume, exterior surface area, cladding assumptions, system capacity. And each of these options is equally open to all of those major moves. So with that as a kind of intro as to how you might be able to look at these relative to value engineering, I'd also like to just look at them relative to educational model and other things that the design subcommittee has brought forward. The design team took some time during the cost estimating period to review a little more in detail the concepts that were presented both on February 13th and March 25th. And just as we get into this, it's interesting to note that options 2 and 3, in terms of cost, are grouped very closely at the bottom as the lowest options. The pinwheel is only slightly higher, and then there's a fairly significant deviation to the double bar. We think that the option 1, the double bar, one of the things that's driving that in terms of cost is the increased glazing and surface area. During this cost estimating period, we met with Lori and Justin and just reviewed a little bit more clearly what was contained in the options. and then also try to respond to their concerns as well as those items brought forward by the design subcommittee. So we can go to the next slide. And again, so recognizing that on March 25th, the double bar scheme, the double bar concept, I'm going to try and just talk about what we've done between March 25th and April 15th in the context of time. I'm assuming that people have seen these concepts, that they're fairly familiar with them, and we don't have to go back to the very beginning and talk about the overall organization. But one of the things that we attempted to do within between the period of March 25th and April 15th was look at ways that we might be able to reduce the overall building envelope while maintaining the spirit of the scheme of the option. You can see within the March 25th diagram, there were a few interior courtyards. If you could, yeah, point. And so what we thought, if there's a way that we could get these closer to apples, we would look at potentially reducing that. So the option on the far right shows that impact as a, so it doesn't impact the gross square footage of the enclosed area, but it does reduce the envelope. So then,
so if I can just note that these are things that are not in the estimates right now. The March 25th is what's in the estimate. So we've already made some improvements that would reduce costs.
That's correct. And and the other thing is when we get to the VE options, I do think we're going to talk about building volume, exterior surface area, differentiation of cladding, percentage of glazing. Those are the, you know, the interior fit out allowance. Every option is ripe for those same kinds of adjustments. So anyway, in this option, that's what we have modified. If we go to the next one, just generally talking through with Lori and Justin in terms of how the building was organized, no other major adjustments. It has a very nominal impact on the building siding. Go again. And then just a little bit more in detail. I would say one of the things that becomes increasingly more relevant in our discussions with the educational team is the relationship between what's called on-team and off-team classrooms, and then not only team fidelity, but grade fidelity. So one of the issues with this option, not an issue, for things to consider, is the relationship of the off-team classrooms, which is essentially world language, and their relationship to the teams. So that was noted here. So if we go forward to the next one, this is also the option one carries the highest cost per square footage, and I think it's I'll let the estimators comment more fully, but I think it's driven by exterior surface area. Now, relative to,
I don't know if we have time to go through all four options. Do we have any more summary level on this?
Yeah, we do. So option two, I think, is important in that we didn't really make any true adjustments to it. So you can go to the next slide. And again, no modification to the position on the site, no major organizational changes. You go two forward. Option three was a little more significant in the opportunity to make some adjustments here. What we did there was, you can see we significantly rotated the building to have a much more preferred solar orientation. We removed the interior courtyard from the western side, and then we also rearranged the relationship of teams within the educational community on the right side of the building there. And so putting the community pieces there, it's interesting that option three, right now it sits you know, at the lower end of the cost range and creates a fairly dynamic arrangement of the learning communities. If you can go to the next one, you can see also, no, go back one, please. You can see the rotation of the scheme to be much more effective in terms of its solar orientation and its relationship to the street. So this one has really moved through some advancement, and we did that on an area neutral way. We didn't increase the square footage or any of those things. Okay, if we can go just to the option 4. Option 4 faced some criticism, rightly so, about the orientation of the learning communities, that they were almost a fair amount were receiving some Western sun. And so we looked at what happens if you're able to rotate the building a bit to increase those orientations. It has a slight impact on the organization of the more kind of public component of the building in terms of the gym, the cafeteria, the media center. But we think if you go to the next one, that solar orientation is improved. Let me just say a few other things here. I know that what is on the table, you're considering integration of building options. So we have forwarded a memo to Kristen about that. I don't know if it's made its way to Hill or to your team, but we think that you can incorporate those building options into any of the concepts. But so I think that I'm willing to entertain any questions about the building options. This series of work from April 15th is not reflected in the cost estimate. I think those things, except for the removal of the glazing in concept 1, you know, they didn't really change the estimating assumptions since March 25th. But I do think things like building volume and building surface, which we have proposed to Hill and to Fogarty and to PMC as cost reduction strategies, they're applicable to all of the concepts. Are there any questions on that?
I just have a general question. At the I know that the educational Lori and Justin had a chance to look at these and make comments. For the team, could you share the preferable designs from an educational standpoint?
Hey,
Maybe
Mike,
Lori?
if you would just land on image 18, it shows them in relation to one another. So that might be a helpful comparison.
You want me to answer that?
Yes.
So when Justin and I took the time to go through this and then did it with the design subcommittee, essentially we were preferring options 3 and 4 because of the layout, not just of the teams, but as you can see, the grade level ends up being clustered. So if you assume what you're looking at is 1 grade level's worth of teams, and then they're 3 stories high, at least in option 3, they're 3 stories high. You can see that the grade level becomes a community as well, more so than in the linear fashion in option 1 or in the fairly segregated fashion in option 2. We were intrigued by option 4's ability to segregate off the 6th grade. If you look at the perforated line down to the bottom right, you can see the layout of what would be a 1-story opportunity for our 6th grade set of teams. But as intriguing as that was, given the cost differential, we can be swayed. So option 3 might end up being our preference given those multiple factors. Purely from an educational standpoint, we can't speak to the sustainability and those factors that are getting discussed.
I think Lori is speaking there for the, if you will, education team as well as the design subcommittee. I think that captures it nicely.
Okay. So now it's at Mike. Now we're going to talk value management.
Yeah, so we're going to talk value management here. And again, what we're trying to do here is look at an overall list of items. Hill and SMMA are continuing to work on this. We're continuing to evaluate the numbers. I see a couple numbers, for example, on here on item 26, which that number just seems very low to me. So I'm going to follow back with the estimators on that, for example. But it's a work in progress. So if everybody can keep that in mind, What we've tried to do here at a high level is, if you see, we've identified the items, 1 to 100. Just kind of explaining the sheet here. We try to give you a general description of what the item would be, what trades might be affected by that. Does this option have a potential, a chance, or no chance to affect the educational program or sustainability? What are some of the risks if we were to do this? And maybe some general comments. We haven't really put ball in court yet here. Maybe that's something we start to talk about. We've started to try and fill in the values here. Again, this is a work in progress. And then ultimately what we'd like to be able to do is start to understand, are some of these options things that we just say, that's a no-brainer, let's just do it. Are some of these the other way, that's a no-brainer, we just can't possibly do that. And then, kind of start to delineate that and see where we're going with this. Ultimately, what we'd like to be able to do is go back to the estimators when we're done with this process and say, we have chosen building concept 3 or 4 or whatever concept. We've also chosen these VE items. We've also chosen these enhancement items. Can you now go back and reevaluate that one option with these to see where we're at, so that we have a baseline that we can kind of say, all right, at the end of feasibility, this is where we were at, and this is where we need to move towards. So to that end, the other thing we've done to try and organize this, and please don't get mad at us if we've ordered these wrong, but we've taken a first stab at dividing these into 3 levels. Level 1 here, level 2 is in the middle, and level 3 is at the bottom. And just in a simple discussion, level 1 are the things that SMMA and Hill think in general are probably reasonably easy, things that if you notice on the ed program and the sustainability, most of these say no, that they're not going to affect the ed program, they're not going to affect the sustainability. And that's our assumption. Again, we could have something wrong there. Level 2 gets into starting to affect maybe the ed program or the sustainability, or a little bit of both. And level 3 is stuff that may be big dollar values, but really could affect the overall building. And so I guess where I'm going with it is level 3 items are not necessarily items that we would recommend, but creating a proper VE list, you've got to consider all options. It doesn't mean that, you like that option or that you're recommending that option. It's just an option that's on the table. All right. So I can
Mike,
run down these. Yeah.
Sorry, Mike, just quick. PTNL is potentially, right?
Potentially, yes.
Okay.
So yeah, so I think we've got three options here: yes, potentially, or no. And when we say potentially, like for example, in this very first one, is by adjusting from concrete walks, which are typically light gray, to an asphalt walk, which is black, you might be increasing the heat on the site. Where we say potentially because you already have a lot of asphalt parking lots, a lot of buildings and sidewalks. Is actually going to be a relatively small portion of the overall heat load on that site, and so you can certainly make an argument that there's something there, but is it substantial? We're not really sure.
Got it. Thanks, Mike.
Yeah.
Can I just?
So what we're looking.
Sorry,
go ahead.
Mike, this is Dawn. I don't know. I mean, in my mind, it's hard to make a decision like that, and I'm a designer. So to even without a site plan, and I know some amounts have been baked into these assumptions, but that becomes a maintenance thing too. Like though, you get heaves, you get roots that start to, push asphalt before it might concrete. It seems, and it's $100,000 in the whole scheme of things. Like we are off by 10 million or more. So for me, in a way, and others can feel free to disagree, some of these seem futile in the whole scheme of things. What if we were to say, reduce site expenditure by X amount, so that then as a designer, they have freedom to make decisions rather than saying, oh, well, half of our walks have to be, or whatever it is, adjust 50% of concrete walks to asphalt walks. And Sims, feel free to chime in, but I don't know, it seems to me like some of these could be lumped together in a way that says reduce site you know, from whatever it is, I'm going to guess 12 million down to 11 million, or, you know, take 10% off of site expenditure. That could be done in trees. That could be done in the pavement. It could be done in, you know, curbing, whatever it is, lighting, site lighting. I don't know. It seems to me that at this level, to go to that amount of detail is insanity because we don't even have a site plan. So I don't even know. Some of this is like, this is so much to wrap our heads around, that to ask us to make a decision like that is I don't know. What do others think?
This is Stephen. Dawn, I completely agree. I think, you know, to me, what I get out of this exercise today is, you know, and I know, God bless the designers and SMMA and Hill in trying to get the level of detail that they have, but there are some big choices that the committee needs to make. And what this exercise has shown me is that each thing is a chunk of money. Whether or not that chunk is defined in sufficient level of detail is something I think I agree with you, Don. I don't think we're there yet. But an auditorium is a chunk of money. Passive house is a chunk of money. A larger gym is a chunk of money. And where we're at today is we can't afford all the chunks.
Right.
And so that's the discussion, you know, I think it should just be, I agree with you, Don, reduce the amount of glazing by 15%. You know, and then design around that. And then, you know, just, you know, I know it needs to be some more drilling down to the sustainability thing. That one is a trickier question because there's a lot of aspects to that. A larger gym's a larger gym. It's a yes or no. Same thing with the auditorium. It's more of a style thing. But I mean, we need to start looking at this in big chunks, not walkways, but walkway material. So I agree with you.
Yeah, I'm just feeling like, and I'm a professional in the room, and I'm feeling overwhelmed with like, you know, 100,000 here, 50,000 there. Like, that's not even where we are. If we were like $1 million over, I'd be like, yeah, absolutely. Like, let's go through the minutia of like small amounts, but that's not where we are. I think some of these bigger decisions, as far as how it could relate to all the options that Keith alluded to, as far as massing, as far as height of the building, as far as materials choices. And, you know, it's back to my point earlier where there are some substantial overages higher than I'm used to seeing in certain parts of this building. And, you know, I don't, just in the cost estimates. And I'm having a hard time saying, yeah, cut back the 50% of the walkways. Like, I want to know what's in the building. I want to know what the assumptions were that the interior costs compared to projects I'm working on. We're talking $2 to $3 million more for just the cost of what's inside the building. So what are the assumptions? What are the finish assumptions? Something has to be there for these estimators to put a cost on it. So, you know, between the exterior, the super shell exterior closure roof, so the shell of the building and the interiors, on all of the options, it's like millions more than I'm used to seeing. So I want to really dive into what those assumptions are. What's the facade of the building? I don't even know. Does anyone?
If I could just say something.
Please.
Yeah, I'm not a professional. And for me, what this level of detail tells me, and it's helpful to kind of see this, and I'd kind of like to, I want to go look at the bottom line. You know, you add up all these little tiny things. Does it really make a difference? It helps at least to communicate that we've looked at all the little tiny things, because the public will want to make sure we've done that. And then we can come out at the exact same place that we really need to look at the big rocks on this, not the little rocks. So I totally agree with what Dawn and Stephen have said, that it's going to be the big pieces. But for me as a non-professional, it is a little bit helpful to know that we can't just add up all these little things and come out where we need to be.
Well, I appreciate that, Pat, and I agree. But I think there's a time and a place to go through the details. And for me right now, and I'm just looking at the VE list, if we were to say reduce the air conditioning, right? That's whatever the value is, 500-ish, $500,000. But if we make that decision now, it's never coming back. And for me, I don't want to reduce the air conditioning and then have some custom exterior panel that costs all this money that we could have made a different decision about. So that's where my head is. Like, to get into some of the decisions that are made here, like there are some things on here that I'm like, no way. A vinyl window in a 50-year school, no freaking way will I let that happen here. That's not going to happen. Like, I've never put a vinyl window in a public school. So there are some things on here that I'm just like, no way, no how. But there are also things that I'm like, why are we making that decision right now if there are other decisions that could be made to make substantial reductions? And then we go through the detail of this, because I don't know, for me, the overage that we're talking is like 10%. And some of these details are like 0.01%. And it just, I don't know. Again, people can feel free to disagree with me. And I appreciate your input, Pat, because you aren't a professional and this isn't what you do. But for me to make some of these, in my mind, tough decision as a line item is harder to wrap my head around, because once you eliminate something, it's really hard to get it back. I've been through this process more times than I want to admit. And I try to never completely eliminate something. In feasibility, we have years of design to go. If you eliminate a major decision right now, it's never coming back. And I'd rather wrap my head around some of the assumptions that were made to get us to 608 or whatever it is to 643 a square foot, when in my mind, if we were somewhere between 550 and 6, I'd feel a lot better about going through this exercise.
Dawn, if I, this is Kristen. I'm sorry, my camera has never worked. So we completely agree that we don't want to lose sight of the forest for the trees with this list. We do have those bigger line items to attack. I think part of the idea behind putting together a so-called VE list is that it does help us tease out those baseline assumptions, because we did do a detailed reconciliation meeting on Wednesday and spent a very long time working through those assumptions. And
right. Those are all big things, and trust me, I don't envy you.
Yeah, and so after we came out of that and still arrived at where we did, and also hearing your input from the projects that our estimators are involved in, we definitely want to attack those bigger chunk line items. But we also needed to do kind of a brain dump on this VE list to see what are the underlying items and what are we making decisions on. So I think I speak for the whole team into saying that the team is going to be looking at these, and these are by no means things that we plan on, making a huge decision on taking off the table, but it's to help us understand what the assumptions are in that estimate and re-attack the shell, the interiors and things like that. So
yeah, and I appreciate that, because those are the areas, those in HVAC are the areas that I'm seeing grossly off from the buildings that I'm working on.
And one of the other items, well, not one of, but several of these items also, the speed at which we went through the educational programming, visioning, and the concept development, we shorted ourselves a little bit on time, and then COVID, of course, on meetings and time with the educational team to really drill down to things like the operable partitions and what do those look like and how many are there. We made a first passive assumptions based on our experience, but I think we need to revisit that conversation with Lori. Similar to the assisted listening, we found out that the AV and electrical budget is very much being driven by having that throughout the school. Maybe we don't need it, but it's a conversation we haven't had the chance to drill down into. So I think we have a lot of...
Kristen? Is that like a top system where every room has the ability to project the sound?
Yes.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah, and so buildings have that too. Like every learning space has that. So.
Right. And so then of course, when we had our meeting with you on Friday, naturally we don't have exposure to your estimate on your project, but it was surprising to us to hear, because the estimators use their information from prior projects
I know.
So why, how could
I'll
they?
share it with you, Kristen. I mean, I'm like full disclosure. I have no problem sharing what their assumptions are, and I can tell you that, and I've gone back through the new material, in literally every single option, it's on the shell and interiors, and then mechanical's a baseline, so it's always almost 1.5 million difference.
Yeah, and so I don't want to tie up the whole committee too long, but I do agree, Dawn, that for us it was a huge surprise to hear that. I mean, I think we've made a lot of the same basic assumptions. You said we have this very similar field scope. We have the assistance, the listening throughout. And so where, we really need to revisit with our estimators what drove that change and get that answer to you.
And so that can be a bar between I'm happy to participate, and I work with Peter and Peter all the time. And, I have the backup both from feasibility on that project and schematic and DD. And so anyway, I guess I'm feeling overwhelmed with like little tiny numbers in the value engineering. The only question I had on that was that like the values that are on there, there's 4 different options. Did you use one option to assume? So
I believe right now everything is based off of concept 2, which is the lowest dollar value concept. So again, we're trying to take a conservative review of this. And just to kind of expand on that, your comments a little bit, Don, we definitely do have larger dollar value items here. Like Kristen said, we wanted to do everything, list everything here. One of the things you'll notice, some of the larger dollar value items are also some of the things you really probably don't want to do, such as taking air conditioning away. So we wanted to try and get as many other items out there. And again, I think we said at the beginning, there's going to be some items here that I think it's easy to say yes, some that it might be reasonably easy to say no, and there's going to be a lot of gray. So we're not necessarily saying we have to make all these decisions today. We know we're order of magnitude $10 million over, and even if we took everything on this list right now, we might be close to that $10 million. Really, is where So we've got to keep expanding this list, and I think one of the homework assignments that the design team in Hill has is to continue to refine this list, continue to refine the estimated values here. One of the things we're going to ask from the committee is if you see something, or if you know of something, or think you might know of something that we don't have on the list, by all means, let us know so that we can add it to that list for the discussion.
So how do we move forward? When's our next meeting? Is it next week?
Next Thursday.
Next Thursday.
And forgive me because there's so much going on in my world right now. What are we trying to do between now and then?
If I could start.
I think.
Go ahead, Mike.
Oh, go ahead. All right. I think step 1 on the value engineering log is for us to continue to refine that. From the committee standpoint, if you have any comments on that, if somebody wants to tell us, I would absolutely take items 7, 12, and 14, or I absolutely wouldn't take that. That kind of information would be great so that we can bring that back to the group next week. I think that there's been a lot of information here for the committee to digest, and you probably have lots of questions. So what we would like to do is get those questions from you so that we can start formulating answers, and we can start coming back next Thursday with some of those answers so that everybody is informed of those questions and answers, and it helps kind of, I'll say, narrow down on what concept are we leaning towards. And if we get to a point next week where we can narrow it down from 4 to 3, that's great. If we can narrow it down from 4 to 2 or something like that, the more narrowing down we can do on these, if there's enhancement options that we want to consider or not want to consider, if there's VE items we want, anything we can do to narrow this down, narrow the focus down, is just helpful for the design team to be able to further the next step of the design.
So from my perspective, again, going back to not wanting to lose the sight of the forest for the trees, I think the work of the committee and your input would be so beneficial on the larger pieces of the project, such as the auditorium and the gymnasium and the approach to sustainability. Because let's say, we're going to do due diligence around this estimate and the base. We are going to work hard on that 144,000 square foot estimate. to get it back toward the low end of, you know, the 555 per square foot that met the $100 million project cost budget. But, you know, say we make it halfway or all the way, there's still the looming biggest question around the other items. And I know that you've heard a lot from the community about gym and performance space, and we'll do our work with the sustainability subcommittee to refine the net zero and passive house approach. But those bigger chunks are going to be the biggest decisions, I think, that that we would like to make sure you have time to dialogue on.
That's difficult right now, as you can imagine, when we cannot. It's very difficult to get community input right now, given the structures that we have to communicate. So I'm a little bit. I can't tell you that we're going to make decisions on the gym and the auditorium next week, okay? Because we need a bigger dialogue, so we have to think about that, okay? I'm not sure how we do that.
Great, and Tim, I completely empathize and hear that. And so, would it be worthwhile to discuss with the whole committee what the approach is? You know, do we come up with a contingency plan? Do we come up with alternatives to community input like surveys? I mean, I think, you know, I'd be interested in hearing from you all. There is the communication subcommittee, and I know that you have been doing some work.
Yeah, this is Heather. I can jump in here for a second and say, not that I have an answer, but that yes, Pat and I have talked about kind of what would the alternatives be if we needed to collect community feedback, you know, which could include certainly surveys and virtual forums and mailings and that kind of thing. So we have started to give it some thought. That said, I'll just express here, I have great reservations about trying to do it all virtually. I think the in-person collection of input on this in this community is extremely important. So I'll just express those reservations now. I know it's not a big discussion now. I would also say maybe if we need to talk about this as a committee, that maybe that's something that we could put, I don't know if it makes sense to put it on the agenda next week as part of this follow-up discussion. But I do feel like that's an important discussion to have. And I feel very strongly that we can't make decisions next week because any decisions have to have a lot more public input than we can get right now. We really haven't gotten any on this yet.
Okay, we have a couple of minutes here. I think from our standpoint of what next week, I think two things came out of this that were important to me. One is this issue of focusing in on the bigger issues of the value management, the basic assumptions that went into the estimators, and are those off in some significant way. And I think, you know, Don is a lead person from our side on that, working with SMMA and Hill. Okay, so I think next week we would like to review some work that is done this week relating to what are the significant assumptions, the big rocks. I think that was a great, image, Pat. What are the big rocks from the estimation, and where are we able to make some difference in those? Okay. Number two, I think we need to get a little bit higher level of dialogue with our sustainability group and the sustainability resources, not in the infinite level of detail, but in these are the things that we think should be included in an aggressive level of sustainability for the project. I'm a little bit surprised that hasn't occurred to date, not at the granular level of detail, but in these are the significant items that need to be involved if we're with our increased level of sustainability. If we can get those two things done to some degree this week and use those as a basis next week for a second level discussion on the base building cost, okay? And I know they're probably going to be ranges, and they're going to be I really believe in what Don said there in terms of giving the designer some sort of flexibility at this level, okay? Because we can't do every one of these little things in terms of making decisions on them, but I think we can look at the estimates. We can look at the assumptions that the estimators use and make some large observations on where costs could be reduced in the building. My feeling is that from everything that I've heard, the committee's input is that concept 3 is more in line with the educational goals of the committee. So I'm not the one to narrow everything down, but it seems to me we are narrowing down more to that concept than others.
Tim? Hey, Tim?
Yeah. Yes.
Hey, Stephen, I'm sorry to interrupt, but you just said what I was thinking, which is, what's preventing us from just choosing an option to work with and going from there? I mean, I know we want public input, but in the representative democracy form of government that we have, the committee is tasked with getting into the nitty gritty and making an option to present to the public that's preferred based on the expertise on the committee. And why aren't we just saying, here's the option that works best, and then doing all the VE and the big rock decision making on the option?
Can I just say something, Stephen? I agree with you completely. I don't know why we can't just narrow this down. Before we go out to the community to get input into whether we want the gymnasium or the auditorium, how big they're going to be, I think we need to have confidence in what our base cost is. And I don't think we have that. And if we can narrow down our selection and get some of these big rocks taken care of, and come back with some confidence on what this is going to cost, and then we can go out to the community and say, what do you want? And this is how much more it's going to cost you. I don't think we can do the community input without knowing what we're asking the community to pay for.
Yeah, and I haven't heard anyone say that by choosing options 1, 2, 3, or 4, we give up the opportunity to do any of the option of the program options. I haven't heard that there's if you do one of these options, you lose this opportunity. It seems like all of the opportunities we're talking about go with all 4 options. If I heard that correctly, then again, I don't know why we can't just move forward with a preferred option.
Because you do have, in the design, you have the opportunity to refine the option you've chosen. It's not I don't have any problem with that. I mean, I personally, given that from what I've heard thus far, and the educational preference for number 3, I don't have a problem saying that that's what we want to focus on right now.
I agree.
You want to take it a step further then? Go ahead and agree to that, and also hit some of these other big items today? For example, we've already discussed the auditorium quite a bit. And my understanding on the auditorium was that it's an option that's outside the scope of what would be called the educational program, and that it could be put to the voters as an option outside the scope of the 144,000 square foot facility. Now, I mean, maybe we didn't decide that, but it seems to me that, along with what Stephen is saying, that we've been through some of these issues to quite an extent already.
I'm not ready to say that right now, but if we stay with it appears right now that I'm not sure of this. The preferred option is 3, and that we want to get the base building more defined in terms of looking at the assumptions this week and coming back on that, and having our sustainability group and the sustainability folks at SMMA agree on the potential things that might be included in an enhanced level of sustainability. I think that's a big goal for next week.
But the base building so far does not include an auditorium, but it does include the
That's
small.
correct. Right now.
So we know that.
Okay.
So Tim,
Yeah.
I'll make a motion to choose option 3.
I'll second that emotion.
Let's have a little discussion. Anybody have problems with that?
I'll speak for myself. I'm a member of the design committee, subcommittee. We didn't take a formal vote, but that seemed to be the informal consensus, and we referred to it as such. I think it's imperative, as Charlie says, that the community have the opportunity to weigh in around a one class 275 seat gymnasium at a minimum. I think they need their voice. I think they need their voice on the 8,600 square foot gymnasium. I think that sentiment has been clearly expressed by the community. And I am in favor of option 3, and all 4 options at this point don't preclude any of the auditorium or gymnasium or sustainability considerations. That sustainability is also going to have to go in front of the community. And then I would add one critical caveat. It has to be presented to the community in such a way that if the community is not in favor of some of these enhancements, it doesn't jeopardize a path forward for the core educational facility that can't wait.
Okay, there's a lot there, but I think embedded in that, you're okay with, we're on, right now we're discussing the potential of option 3. You're okay with that?
That is correct.
Okay. Any other comment on that?
And I think it's pretty clear, this is Chris speaking, that we can explain why 3 is our preferred one and still explain to the community why we considered the other options not as favorable. I think Lori's made that clear. I think Justin's made it clear, and so forth.
Anyone else?
Yes, Tim, this is Heather.
Yes.
I guess my video is not coming up, sorry. But anyway, I am fine with concept 3. I like that. I guess my only concern is process-wise, and maybe this is being over conservative, but at least on the school committee, we don't usually take votes unless it's posted as a vote. Is that, so I'm just kind of bringing that up and saying, is that okay here? And the follow-up question would be, does it, in terms of what happens over the coming week until next week's meeting, if we do this, does that make a big difference in making this coming week's work more efficient? And if that's the case, maybe we need to take this vote now instead of waiting until next week. But I just wanted to put those factors out there and understand them better.
Tim, if you don't mind, if I could maybe make a statement, because I think it ties into a lot of what Heather was just saying, the comments I was at. I think my understanding right now is any one of the 4 options meets the educational requirements. I think any one of them meets some of the sustainability. You know, there's some slight differences there with things of that nature, but I think in general, they're relatively equal from that point of view. Right now, option 1A, the double bar, is the most expensive. The other 3 are relatively equal again. And I think if we were to suggest focusing on option 3 for the next week, and as we're reviewing that, if we think any of the value engineering would be substantially different from one of the other options, we could bring that back. But if we don't want to officially vote to move forward with option 3, but maybe you vote to focus on option 3, that gives the design team and the estimators the chance to really focus in and maybe get a little bit more definitive numbers and some better ideas on that.
Stephen, you have a problem with that?
I mean, it's kind of a distinction without a difference. I mean,
yeah.
I guess, and I'm sorry if I sound a little frustrated, but it's like, why are we pretending to not know what we know, which is there's an option that the people that have worked most on this feel like is the preferred one. And I've been a part of enough projects to know and this is going back to Dawn's earlier point, until you can focus and visualize the actual thing you're working on, all of these other things are just, it's paralysis by analysis. And
Yeah, I agree
mean,
with that.
I mean, what are we here for? What are we here for if not to make decisions and recommend decisions to move forward on that honestly can be all undone with another vote later, but at least let's put a marker down and say, here's where we are. Let's move forward on this.
If I might, I want to, without saying what Heather said, I think we ought to bear that in mind, however. If we have a path forward where we adopt number 3 in a week, knowing that barring any huge surprises that's going to happen, then the community at least has a window to throw a huge surprise at us, and we don't suffer for it down the road. We can move ahead with the presumption that there's a lot of favorable opinion about number 3 without formalizing it today. I think it just throws an extra risk there we don't need.
Yeah, okay, what, we're right. at
So
the end
Tim,
here.
I can revise my motion.
Well, why don't, I mean, we can revise that. Why don't we, you've made the motion, and why don't we table that motion for this week and take it up next week, okay? But let's, at the same time, for any considerations this week, we are committed to focusing on option 3, okay? So that,
Yeah, I think, Tim, what I was going to say is I do think that we should vote to say that option 3 is the preferred option for the educational program, and that the design team should focus on that option. I mean, if the committee doesn't feel like we need to memorialize that in a vote, that's fine. But that's the statement we're making.
yeah, so will you, do you want to revise your motion?
Yeah, the motion would be to, instead, my original, the motion that's on the floor is to choose option 3. I would revise that to say to choose option 3 as the one that best meets the educational program, and to further instruct the design team to focus on option 3 in the coming week.
Is there a second to that revision?
I'll second.
Question? I have a question.
Yes.
If we do this, what are the opportunities, to Heather's point, for process? Would this, knowing now that we're going to say that option 3 is preferred from the educational point of view, well, is that something that can go before the school committee for some discussion, and then some very limited something on the website? I'm just wondering, I think this is a good idea, but do we need to get it out there somehow?
So, Pat, Heather can speak to this better, so I'll be quick, but Heather will report on this next Tuesday at a school committee meeting, and I think that would be one of probably several ways that this preference, I'll call it, I think it's a preference vote that directs activity over the next week, is going to be known to the community pretty quickly through all of our efforts, yours notably too, on the outreach side. So yeah, we'll go before school committee, but again, it's not a school committee project, so it'll be just one place where this gets discussed.
Okay.
I'm happy to announce it tonight at the select board meeting this afternoon.
Okay, any further discussion? Will you restate your motion, Stephen, so everybody's aware?
I move to choose option 3 as the one that best meets the educational program, and to further instruct the design team to focus on option 3 for the next design interval.
There's a second. I mean, we had that seconded, right?
Yep.
Okay, I'm going to go around. Unless there's any further discussion, I'm going to go around for a vote. Stephen Crane?
Yes.
Jared Stanton?
Jared had to go.
Susan Bates?
Yes.
Lori Hunter?
Yes.
Justin Cameron?
Yes.
John Harris?
Yes.
Russ Hughes?
Yes.
Pat Nelson?
Yes.
Kate Hanley?
Yes.
Court Booth?
Yes.
Heather Bout?
Yes.
Frank Cannon? Chris Popoff?
Yes.
Charlie Parker?
Yes.
Matt Root?
Yes.
I say yes. Don?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Well, thanks for that work. That was good. So we've basically chosen option 3 to focus on for the work, at least over the next week. And number 2, we're going to revisit the assumptions that went into the estimators and hopefully look at those in terms of some of the issues that Don has raised with that group. And the Sustainability Committee has a meeting tomorrow, and hopefully we'll get closer in terms of what some of the inclusions are we feel are in an enhanced sustainability package, and we'll revisit all those things next week. Okay. Thank you all. This was a long road today. I think it was important to get all that information out, and I appreciate people's willingness to hang in there and focus on this. It's difficult to do this in an online environment. I think we did a reasonable job. So with that, I'd entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
So moved.
I'm just going to do this one. All in favor?
All right.
Aye.
Okay, thank you all.